I leave the floor now to Barbara, just to enter exactly in what you are talking about. So what is universal design?
Good morning again. Thank you, Lorenzo. This is my presentation. What is universal design? I'm an architect and a research fellow at the University of Trieste, and I started getting into universal design when I was a student. I realized that almost never, when designing, we think about doing it for as many people as possible. And this is a cultural problem linked to the how we are trained, because as we will see also in this presentation, we normally think on standards instead of universal. I've been lucky to find a research group at the University of Trieste that deals with urban accessibility, and so I started this research path on universal design that now, with the side project, focuses on sustainable tourism. So the main question we have to do to ourselves is, are our cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable? This is the goal number 11, something we must consider as architects, but also as academics and professionals, and also as citizens who work in various fields. Do we provide services designed for everyone? Do we convey for information that everyone can understand? Let's think about the sentence right to access. Despite the progress made in recent years, we know that one of the most excluded category is still that of people with disabilities. I want to show these two really interesting documents edited by United Nations to examine disability and the Sustainable Development Goals at the global level, in particular the second one from 2024. 6 years away from the deadline for the agenda, the Disability and Development Report show that persons with disability are being left behind. I thought leave no one behind is the SDGs slogan. And the way things are going, the world will not achieve the SDGs by, for, and with persons with disabilities by 2030. Accelerations are particularly needed in making physical and virtual environments, in adopting anti-discrimination legislation, in expanding social protections, and in implementing measures to guarantee the safety and protection of all persons with disabilities during also disasters and emergency. But what can be done to improve this situation? As we can see in this diagram, from the point of view of the design process, there are several methods to choose. If we start thinking on people with disabilities, we have the so-called accessible design, which is a design specifically focused on extending standards design to persons with disabilities, or we can say with some type of performance limitation. Another design field is that of inclusive design, which is a specific approach which considers the different needs of users, trying to ensure that everyone can use products or services regardless of their personal characteristics. And finally, we come to universal design, which means that the product, service, or space have to be usable by all with no adaptation needed. So the difference between inclusive and universal design can be explained so: inclusive design accepts and embraces multiple design variations, while universal design enforces single design solution without need for adaptations or specialized design. So the concept of universal design is strongly linked to Ronald Mace. He was an American architect and designer who was the first to coin the term. Mace, suffering from poliomyelitis since childhood, believing that disability depends on contexts. And he has been interested in accessible design issues all his life. Ronald's concept of universal design was to design all products and buildings to be visually pleasing and usable to the greatest extent possible by everyone, regardless of age, ability, or situation. With his thinking, Mays gave a strong reformative action in the field of ethical transformation within contemporary American society for people who manifested an obvious physical disability. Universal design emerged out of the disability rights movement, which began in the late 60s, and its goals is to bring people with disabilities into the mainstream of society by ensuring equal opportunity and eliminating discrimination based on disability. Equality of access to the environment has always been an issue in civil rights, and in the United States, prior to the Civil Rights Act, discrimination practices have been directed not only at racial groups, but also at groups defined by many other characteristics, such as religion, ethnicity, class, sexual orientation, and also disability. Through the disability rights movement, people with disabilities have redefined themselves, and the symbols used in the movement provide a good indicator of how far the change has come. In the left is the first international symbol of accessibility, which denotes the availability of accessible facilities. And in the right, we see a more active and forceful symbol, a new universal symbol for accessibility in continuity with its predecessor, but differently showing a dynamic and moving person. This new symbol, which the name is the Accessible Icon Project, has 4 strong points. The first, the head is placed forward to indicate the person's movement, so it is the person who controls his mobility, an independent person therefore. The second characteristic is that the arm is bent backwards to indicate the dynamism of a person despite being in a wheelchair. The third characteristic, the cuts on the wheel, give the idea of movement. And the fourth, compared to the old symbol, the legs are visible. So universal design has an important meaning because it looks beyond architectural barriers. From the perspective of accessible design, if there is evidence of some architectural barrier and there is the availability of funds to eliminate it, efforts go in the direction of symbol elimination. But we know that urban and built environment can be much more accessible and enjoyable, not only for the absence of barriers, but also for the presence of elements designed with care and quality to facilitate the usability of spaces to the widest number of people. So the challenge is to go beyond the concept of dedicated solutions, and this is what means universal design. The elimination of barriers is anyway fundamental, but it's important to consider that they have to be seen as an experiential and intellectual phenomenon for each of us. Some are visible and some are not. In everything we do, there are barriers to movements, to space and time, barriers to access, to communicate, to perception, or to expression. They can block us out, divert us from our goals. They can cause fatigue, limit our opportunities, and the environmental barriers can also put us in dangerous situations. As we can see in this picture, most likely the lady chose the cycle path because she couldn't get into the curb. Some barriers are physical, some are social, cultural, or psychological. And breaking down barriers can allow people who are disadvantaged or oppressed in a literal sense to gain access to resources. Barriers can also have a dual meaning. The same physical feature can both facilitate and impede the achievement of goals. The most obvious example is how a door can simultaneously protect a home from unwanted entries, so prevent people from coming in, while also providing privacy for the household, so prevent information from going out. And another example is the mobile phone, which facilitates communications but also may increase interruptions. So the psychological nature of barriers is always open to interpretation by individuals and groups, and understanding those interpretations is a major focus of universal design. Who can benefit from universal design? The answer is anyone. But the process is not so easy because, as I said before, our society has to deal with a criticality that has rigidly shaped the space in which we live. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, designers are educated to design for a mythical group of average people which doesn't exist. Science, medicine, engineering often take the young, white, able-bodied male as the norm, yet every individual is unique, and as a group, the human species is quite diverse. The reference that most supports this thesis can be traced back to the International Classification of Functioning, Disability and Health. For the first time, ECF shifted the focus from a reductive view of disability as a physical or mental impairment to the needs of the person's environment, thus contributing to the definition of disability provided by the World Health Organization as a part of being human that almost everyone will experience temporarily or permanently at some point of their life. So by adopting this concept, it becomes evident how taking the standard band as a reference it's wrong, and given that this is an ideal profile and distant from reality. Another critical issue also concerns the conception of disability on which society moves and the need to flip to the perspective. The medical model views disability as a consequence of a health condition, disease, or accident that disrupts function. Here, disability is something wrong that needs fixing to make a person more normal. And the other side, the social model of disability, is completely different because it sees disability as the attitudinal, physical, systemic communication and technological barriers created by society. It doesn't deny the impact of an individual's impairment, but it does seek to put the responsibility on society to accommodate people living with disability, rather than expecting the individual to accommodate for society. Universal design goals are better realized if designers understand the needs and the preferences of a wide range of groups. For example, we have to think on other categories, like people who are not typical defined as having a functional limitation, but have temporary or permanent limitation in function due to body shape or stature. These include pregnant women, single mothers, children, and also outliers in typical population distribution of human characteristics. For example, very short, very tall, very light, or very heavy people. Another category is that of caregivers, who have people dependent on them and benefit directly through an environment that supports their care activities. This group includes families with small children, families with members with disabilities, also even professional caregivers. Another category is that of people with psychosocial conditions such as autism, Alzheimer, and chronic depression, who encounter social barriers but also may have limitation in motor activities, perception, and cognition. Then the category of people with behavioral and functional limitation to alcohol or drug dependency, but also medications that alter perception or cognition. Minority ethnic groups of foreign visitors with culturally based traditions, preferences, and expectations that are different from those of the majority of the population, including differences in language, diet, social interactions, and related spatial behaviors. But also low and even middle-income population who often experience lack of access to services and resources to the residential location and limited mobility. This broader approach to defining the target population for universal design changes our perspective significantly. rather than viewing the target population as the less able, to whom we owe a charitable effort. It demonstrates that respecting everyone's right to an environment free of unnecessary barriers facilitates the development of products and environments that work equally well for all. This picture is from a very well-designed toolkit by Microsoft, which encourages developers to design technology that benefits users of all abilities, thus creating technology that works for everyone, not just the able-bodied or tech-savvy. You can recognize that the difficulties can be permanent, temporary, or situational, and in all cases may concern touch, see, hear, speak area. And also specific targets are then reported: families, friends, or strangers. We have almost reached the end of this brief introduction to universal design. An important point of reflection concerns how to practice universal design. And as an architect, as designer, what can I say is that one of the most strategic action is listen to the needs of the users. In all fields, each of us can widen the view to try to listen to as many people as possible and thus improve the knowledge of their needs. In the next presentation, my colleague will tell about the 7 principles of universal design which are useful to guide the process of adopting this design approach. Although it has been studied for several years, its application is still limited. Again, resistance to change is one of the biggest obstacles. The last thought concerns the fact that there are various applications of the principles and the universal design methods, even if universal design is not explicitly mentioned. An example is the field of wayfinding, a set of strategic strategies to facilitate people's orientation in the use of spaces. There is no ideal way to organize visual communication within a space. Even the most seemingly rational organization may, in fact, be impractical for a certain type of users. So it's easy to understand that spaces designed for an adult person who works independently, sees well, and has no cognitive problems may not be suitable for people with different conditions. A wheelchair user, for example, may find it difficult to see signs placed very high up on the walls, or a visually impaired person will have difficulty reading unclear lettering, or a child or an elderly person with cognitive impairment will find over-elaborate symbols very incomprehensible. Thank you for your attention.